Now that Daytona's over, what is everyone going to talk about for the next few weeks? How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Daytona is behind us, which means we won't be back at another plate track until mid-October when we head to Talladega, so we get to take it easy for a little while. And by easy, of course, I mean go to Kentucky Speedway, which is one of the fastest tracks on the series circuit and was repaved and reconfigured not that long ago, so yeah, not taking it that easy, I guess. So talking about Daytona, first thing I want to talk about is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. If you had told me at the beginning of this year that Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was going to win 2 races this year, if you even told me he was going to win 1 race this year, I wouldn't have believed you. But winning 2? Talk about overachieving. So yes, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. got the win at Daytona this weekend. He avoided the big wrecks, ran up front actually for a large portion of the night, had a really strong car in a couple different instances, was able to take the lead with just a couple laps to go, was able to hold on and win, yes, his 2nd race of the season. So not only is he in the chase or the playoffs now, but he's going to be potentially a pretty high seed. And I'm proud of Ricky Stenhouse because he proved that that win at Talladega earlier this year was not a fluke because clearly, I mean, Roush Fenway, their Speedway program, their Super Speedway program must be pretty good. I mean, I remember a few years ago when they had one of the best Super Speedway programs. It looks like at least maybe they've gotten that aspect of their game back to full capacity. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. started the year off fairly strong and then got that win at Talladega, but since then, you know, he's fallen back in the points a little bit, but obviously that win has made that kind of not an issue. But hopefully this win, now that he's got 2 wins this year, I think that team might be ready to start to make a small step forward. You know, the last couple of years, Roush Fenway Racing, since Carl Edwards left, or even since Matt Kenseth left, and now Biffle's gone, you know, the veterans that had built that team up to what it was, now that they've been gone or away from that team now for a few years, you know, it seems like this year, Roush Fenway's starting to maybe make those steps to get back to being a possibly a contending team again. I've said this before, but remember this, guys, 12 years ago, they had 5 teams and all 5 of them made the chase. It wasn't that long ago. But oh, how the mighty have fallen, but it seems as though they have started to pick themselves back up. Last year, Roush Fenway didn't even have a car in the chase. This year, they are going to have at least 1 in the playoffs, and to be fair, I don't think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is a championship contender at this point, but it would not surprise me to see him make it into at least the 2nd round, maybe. I could see him getting out of the 1st round. I mean, he's been a top 10 team for runs this season. You know, I think that's possible. And, you know, we might forget. I mean, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., he's an Xfinity Series champion. He dominated down there for a couple of years before he came up to the Cup Series. And sure, maybe when he got to the Cup Series, I don't know how much of it was really him not quite being ready, or how much of it was, at that point, you know, he took over for the 17 when Kenseth left. At that point, Roush Fenway was kind of at the beginning of their pretty steep decline, and I think Stenhouse just, unfortunately, he came up into the big leagues in a time that wasn't the greatest for him to perform well. But now that Roush has shrunk themselves down to a 2-car team, they can focus their energy on just 2 specific cars. They're able to give each more dedication, more time. I think that we're starting to see it pay off a little bit. I still don't think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. or Trevor Bayne, the other driver on that team, are championship contending drivers yet, but at least now their cars aren't, you know, 25th place cars like we've seen the last couple of years. They look like now at times they're top 10, top 15 cars. So I thought it was cool to see Stenhouse win. Proves that his win at Talladega was not a fluke and proves that hopefully Roush Fenway Racing's got some momentum to build off of because I'd like to see them become a good team again. That was fun. Moving on from that, other big news and notes from Daytona. Yeah, there's a lot of wrecks, as you would expect at Daytona. There's really no just huge, gargantuan, big one like we're used to seeing. There's a few moderately decent-sized wrecks. A lot of big-name drivers were taken out. A lot of these, some of them are kind of impacted by multiple wrecks at different points. You know, it was very hard for very few drivers. By the end of the race, we had, I think on the front row on the final restart, it was like Ty Dillon and like Michael McDowell was up there. I mean, you had some David Reagan. I think Brendan Gaughan finished 7th, and he's just like his only Cup race he's running all season. I don't even know. You had a lot of small teams, a lot of kind of, you know, smaller names up towards the front of the field late because they managed to, you know, get around the wrecks, I guess. Probably were far enough behind them. Big name drivers did okay too. Clint Bowyer finished 2nd, so that's really, I'll talk about more about that in a minute, but that was a really big weekend for Clint Bowyer. I thought it was interesting. We really didn't talk much about Jimmy Johnson the other night. He ended up finishing 12th, and I felt like he kind of just was running kind of an awkward, like, kind of was running somewhere between 5th and like 15th basically all night. He was never in the back, but he was never really leading or up at the very front. It was not your typical Jimmy Johnson type Daytona race. But I mean, I'm looking at the finishing results right now. I mean, he had Paul Menard, Michael McDowell, Ryan Newman all in the top 5, David Reagan, Brendan Gaughan, like I said, Allmendinger, Eric Jones, and Chris Buescher, your top 10. Corey LaJoie finished 11th. That's pretty good. I think part of the charm of Daytona is that fans get to see drivers that typically run, you know, in the back, laps down, kind of on the back burner, so to speak. You know, you get to see him kind of run well and actually contend for stuff during the Daytona races. In fact, there was one point, or probably several points during the race, where I was looking at the leaderboard and I was like, you know, the top 13 drivers right now in this race have not won yet this year. And with the way the stupid point system is now, where a win basically guarantees you a spot in the playoffs, I thought that set up some pretty exciting, pretty intense, pretty aggressive racing. I mean, when I read that leaderboard, Stenhouse obviously already had a win this season, but like Boyer, Menard, McDowell, David Reagan, Brendan Gaughan, AJ Allmendinger, Eric Jones, these other drivers in the top 10, they didn't have a win yet. They were this close to getting their win and getting a playoff spot. All in all, it was a pretty topsy-turvy night, full of emotions, I'm sure, for fans of a lot of different drivers. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, probably more downs than ups. A lot of people wrecked. But still, I thought it was a great race, and yeah, time to talk about some other stuff, I guess. I've talked a little bit about the last few weeks, but I think it's a time where there's about 9 races, I think, or so left before the playoffs start. I think it's a good idea to look at the playoff or the chase bubble, so to speak. You know, there's a couple 2 or 3, 4 pretty big names right on this bubble, and with so many winners this year, especially from guys like Ryan Newman or Austin Dillon, people who you don't necessarily expect to win a lot of races each year. You know, them getting vaulted into the top 10 in points. You know, it's put some big names on the bubble, and I think it's a good idea to kind of analyze where they stand at this point. If the playoffs started today, Joey Logano would be the first driver out. And I know, that's what I mean, it's pretty surprising. Logano did get a win earlier this year, but it was encumbered due to a major rules infraction, so it does not count to his automatic admission into the playoffs. So he is currently 3 points behind Matt Kenseth, another pretty big name, in 16th. And both those drivers had iffy days at Daytona. They were both caught up in wrecks. Ultimately, Matt Kenseth did win a stage, so at least he did get some bonus points for that, which is, I guess, good for him, assuming he makes the playoffs. But both were involved in wrecks, so they didn't have the greatest results, weren't really fully able to take advantage of other people's misfortunes the way I'm sure they were hoping they could. But then I also mentioned it earlier, Clint Bowyer came into the weekend right there on the chase bubble with the 2 of them, but because he managed to avoid the wrecks, finish second, took advantage of good fortune, he now sits, I think, a good like 24 points ahead of Kenseth. And I talked about it briefly last week, how these drivers on the playoff bubble really need to look at Daytona as a big make-or-break weekend, or potentially not make-or-break, but could be either very helpful or very detrimental. For guys like Joey Logano, who came into the weekend, I think, 15th in points, he now exits 17th in points, definitely detrimental to that team. Matt Kenseth kind of, you know, he got a stage win, like I said, it was kind of an okay, so-so weekend, but Clint Bowyer, who finished second, definitely made the most of his weekend. And I saw something the other day that kind of was talking about the pressure on some of these drivers, and I was kind of thinking, I don't know which of these, especially these 3 drivers, there's other guys on the bubble like Eric Jones, I think Casey Kane's kind of close, you got Denny Hamlin a little bit further in the chase right now, you know, a lot of these guys are on the bubble, again, pretty big names. But I saw somewhere they were talking about like pressure and which of these, specifically like these 3 drivers, I guess, are under the most pressures, which of these big names are under the most pressure to make the playoffs, and I wonder, I'm like, I don't know who's under the most pressure. I mean, you can look at it like this. Joey Logano, obviously, that's a team. He's made the Final Four a couple times last few years. You know, he's a driver you just expect to make the chase, so if he misses it, that'd be a pretty big deal. But they did get a winner this year, although it was encumbered, so it's not like he's had an empty season. They have had some, you know, success. Sure, missing the playoffs would definitely be a disappointment, though. But then I look at, like, Matt Kenseth. You know, he's a former series champion, you know, and this season, you know, Gibbs has not been as good as they're used to being, but, you know, Matt Kenseth, he's made the chase, I think, every year except one since it was formed, so you expect, that's another driver, you expect to win races, you expect to contend, and you know, this is a contract year for Matt Kenseth. He's not signed on with Joe Gibbs Racing past the season. There's been a lot of speculation about whether he might retire. He keeps shooting that down, I ain't retiring, but hey, if he does not find success this year, there's a good chance Joe Gibbs will basically kick him out of the 20 and to make room for one of these younger drivers like Eric Jones or somebody, and then Kenseth, if he wants to have a high stock, I'm sure, you know, he wants to be seen as a valuable asset to whatever team he potentially goes to next, and if he doesn't do that well this year, doesn't make the playoffs, you know, he might not be able to get a ride with some of these bigger, faster teams. So he's probably dealing with a pretty good amount of pressure as well. And then there's Clint Bowyer, Clint Bowyer went from, you know, 2012 or so, he was one of the final contenders for the championship, battling hard. Looked like he was one of the best drivers, one of the best teams in the sport, to then spending a couple of years with a mediocre team, just having some rough times, having to go each weekend just with a 30th place car and do whatever he could with it. Just had to basically sit there and patiently wait until he would get another good opportunity. But you gotta believe there's some pressure on him now that he's finally gotten that big opportunity with a, you know, big name team, an A-list team, I guess you could say, you know, and he's in that famous 14 car that Tony Stewart ran for several years, you know. It's a team that's run pretty well. Clint Bowyer himself, he's not been a chase playoff driver the last few years, but that's mainly been his team's fault. You gotta believe he's put some pressure, at least on himself, that, you know, he's finally in a really good car, a fast team. He probably really wants to make the playoffs, especially for himself more than anyone. Should be an interesting conversation to keep going. Maybe one of those guys will win this weekend or something and it'll become less interesting, but hopefully I want this chase bubble, playoff bubble battle to be pretty interesting. I think it's going to be wild to see how it shakes up the rest of this regular season. Now, the last big thing I really want to talk about coming out of Daytona, and it's not really talking about the race itself, it's just an observation I made, and I'll be curious to see how you guys saw it as well. I don't think I've talked about him at all so far in the show, but this weekend really felt like it was completely centered around one particular driver, Dale Earnhardt Jr. I know I'm not the only one who saw it. It was pretty obvious. Every 10 minutes it felt like NBC Sports was interviewing Jr. somewhere, someone associated with Junior. Maybe they're interviewing Rick Hendrick. Maybe they're interviewing Jeff Gordon or Jimmy Johnson or somebody. They were interviewing someone associated with Junior, if it wasn't Junior himself, basically every half hour at least. And I'm not just talking about like during the pre-race or stuff. I'm talking about during practice, during qualifying, during the rain delay, during the Xfinity race. It was ridiculous how much coverage Dale Earnhardt Jr. was getting. During the Cup race, they interviewed Dale Earnhardt Jr. right before driver introductions, literally during driver introductions while he was driving around the truck, and then literally during the pace laps less than 5 minutes later. And this wasn't just like, oh, like Fox had their interview, then NBC, then ESPN. No, this is all NBC. This is all on TV over the course of about half an hour. You got these 3 interviews with Junior just in 3 different settings, and they're asking him the same questions. My whole point of this rant was not that I'm mad that Dale Jr. got, you know, a lot of exposure. He's the most popular driver in NASCAR. He's been a good ambassador, I guess, for NASCAR, I think, in the eyes of the rest of the sports world. I think he's been great for the sport. I have no problem with Junior getting attention like that. It's a big race. It's probably going to be his last big race at Daytona, probably his last meaningful race at Daytona, given that this is probably his last chance to make the playoffs. You know, I understood all the attention he was getting. I had no problem with that. My problem was that I just felt bad for Dale Jr. I mean, like I said, around every turn he was being bombarded with the same handful of questions about his legacy, about his father, about his lack of success this year and what this would mean to make the playoffs. He was bombarded with these same questions repeatedly, and the cameras were all on him, the pressure, and this is Daytona. It doesn't matter how good your car is. Anything could take you out. You know, I just couldn't help but feel bad for him. I mean, you look at Dale Earnhardt Jr. and you don't see, like, famous Hollywood celebrity who's used to the paparazzi and getting camera flashes on his face, and he just owns it like a champ, you know? You don't really get that with Dale Earnhardt Jr. He's used to having cameras in his face, sure, but not like this. And Dale Jr., we know him. Many of us are fans of him, you know? He just kind of gives off that you know, sense that he's just kind of an average dude who's out here driving cars, doing what he loves, enjoying hanging out with his friends. He's just laid back about the whole thing, but the media's constantly in his face about it. And I just thought it was unfair. Because then if you watch the race, or you know, Dale Earnhardt Jr. did not have a great evening. He started on pole, seemed to have a decent car, ran up front for a while, but then he had a tire go down, it looked like, got into the wall. Later on, he was caught up in a wreck after he fought to get back on the lead lap. It was, like I said, an up and down day for Junior. You know, up when he started the pole, down when he blew a tire, up when he got back on the lead lap and in contention, and then down when he was ultimately caught up in one of the many wrecks. You know, it was unfair the amount of coverage he was getting in a race where so little he could control. I mean, let's face it, guys. The '88 team, Dale Jr., that whole team has not lived up to expectations this year, or you know, they've just been off. That's why Junior's outside the top 20 in points. That's why he's never contending for wins this year. You know, it's just been a rough season. And I know me personally, if I was struggling at doing whatever I was doing, if I'm like constantly having a struggle, and then all of a sudden all the cameras are pointed at me and they're all asking me these questions about, you know, oh, how does it feel to be at the end or everything, I'd get really frustrated. You know, the last thing anyone wants when they're struggling is a crazy amount of attention. And I don't know. I obviously don't know how Dale Jr. felt about it. He seemed, you know, he handled all the interviews well. You know, he handled them respectfully like he always does, you know, but I can't help but think he had to have probably been just kind of bothered by it all. I mean, watching this week's Radioactive, you know, the videos Fox Sports makes, really great. You could tell in a few of the radio interactions, it seemed like Dale Jr. was just more frustrated than usual. And that's just because I think he had probably more pressure on him this race than maybe any race in his career, to be honest. And I just think that was unfair for the media to do that to him like that. That was also unfair to fans like me who just wanted to watch stuff about all the drivers, and we just had to be bombarded with Junior coverage. Like I said, even during the Xfinity race, they were talking 70% of their coverage was about Dale Jr. I'm like, oh, come on, guys, let's take a step back. There's got to be something else to talk about. Come on. That being said, it was a shame that Dale Jr.'s night did not go as hoped. I mean, I was rooting for him, not as much as I would usually be, because NASCAR's stupid playoff format has it where, you know, like I've ranted about this before, how, you know, you win a race in the regular season, you're automatically locked into the playoffs pretty much. I hate that, because to be fair, I like Junior. I'd love to root for him at Daytona. In my head, I was still kind of rooting for him, even though I knew if he did win the race, it would kind of suck because he would make the playoffs. And, you know, me, I mean, I'm a fan of Matt Kenseth. He's my favorite driver. He's right on the bubble like I was talking about. I'd be irritated that Junior, who's, you know, struggled pretty heavily this year for most of the season, you know, if just this one win would put all that behind him, you know, that's frustrating me. That's another argument for past episodes. You can hear me rant about the playoff system all you want. But anyway, I think I've made my point. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. That's all I have. Leave your thoughts down below. I like to read those. I try to respond to some of them. You know, it's always fun to see what you guys have to say. And thanks especially to all you longtime viewers who've been with this Out of the Groove show since, some of you since it started last season, almost a year ago now. You know, it's really cool to see, you know, all the views it gets, all the attention it gets. It's really cool to see, you know, most of y'all I know are pretty young NASCAR fans, come together and, you know, in a way, we're the future of the sport. You know, they talk about Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott. No, we're the future, because if there's no eyeballs, NASCAR is going nowhere. So it's really cool to see you guys continue to support not only this show, but NASCAR as a sport. Me even, you know, if any of you care, but means a lot. I'm glad you guys continue to watch each week. I try to do the best I can. But anyway, normal plug stuff, Twitter, Patreon, Double E Cup Series Race 4 is now out. You can check that out. It was uploaded a few days ago. Race 5 will be up eventually. Out of the Groove every Thursdays. Not a lot else going on in the world of me, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. I'll see y'all next week. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great Kentucky Speedway weekend.